Hey, so here's the thing. Kristy and Desmond Scott have officially joined the growing list of social media power couples who turned out not to be so powerful after all. And honestly, this one caught a lot of people off guard. After more than a decade of marriage, 11 years, to be exact, Kristy has filed for divorce. Just like that. Cue the collective gasp from everyone who once bookmarked their relationship as #couplegoals. Naturally, the internet went into detective mode. People started asking the obvious questions. What happens to the multi-million-dollar brand they built together? What about the custom mansion they barely had time to settle into? And as it turns out, the situation wasn't just surprising, it was downright messy. As speculation spread, a theory surfaced that left many stunned. Reports claim Desmond didn't just betray the marriage once, but crossed an even more unexpected line, allegedly cheating with a man. Even more shocking was the idea that he supposedly believed Kristy would overlook it all, simply to protect their image and keep the brand intact. But how much of this is fact, and how much is internet rumor spiraling out of control? That's the question everyone wants answered. What we do know is this: Kristy filing for divorce after being with Desmond for over 15 years total was not something anyone saw coming. The news broke when TMZ revealed that she had officially submitted divorce papers in Harris County, Texas. According to the documents, the couple was preparing to live separately, with Kristy citing infidelity as the reason behind the split. Looking back, the signs may have been there. Fans noticed that the two stopped posting content together earlier in December. At the time, most people brushed it off, assuming they were simply taking a break for the holidays. In hindsight, though, that silence may have been the calm before the storm. If nothing else, this situation has reignited a familiar conversation. When relationships become brands, what happens when love cracks behind the scenes? The situation must have reached a breaking point, because the legal documents reportedly made one thing very clear: there was no room left for reconciliation. No pause, no trial separation, no second guessing. Kristy wasn't asking for space, she was closing the chapter entirely. And that's what truly stunned people. This didn't feel like a slow, predictable unraveling. It felt sudden, almost unreal. After all, Kristy and Desmond weren't just a couple who met in adulthood and drifted apart. They'd been together since they were 14. Their entire public identity was built on growing up side by side, becoming adults together, raising their 2 children, and presenting a picture of a grounded, loving family. Their brand wasn't flashy or scandal-driven, it was wholesome, intentional, and deeply tied to the idea of partnership. As their audience grew, they even launched a production company focused on filming emotional, love-centered wedding stories. Romance, commitment, longevity, that was their lane. And then there was the house. Not purchased, not flipped, but designed and built from the ground up. Brick by brick. People don't usually invest that kind of time, money, and emotional energy into a shared future when divorce is looming. That's what made the announcement so disorienting. Nothing about their recent milestones suggested an ending was near. Of course, no long-term relationship is free from tension. Anyone who's been with the same person since adolescence is bound to experience conflict, growing pains, and moments of frustration. And as we all know by now, social media smiles don't always reflect real-life dynamics. Still, fans couldn't help but wonder what could have gone so wrong, so quickly, to bring a marriage like theirs to such an abrupt halt. Some began rewatching old videos with new eyes. They claimed Desmond's energy had shifted, that his reactions felt exaggerated, rehearsed, almost performative, especially during prank content. To some, it looked like disengagement disguised as enthusiasm. Like he had mentally stepped back and let Kristy take the lead until he eventually crossed a line he couldn't walk back from. Others speculated that insecurity may have played a role, especially if Kristy had become the primary breadwinner. Maybe resentment quietly built, looking for an outlet. But there were also people who sensed something heavier beneath the surface. They didn't believe a relationship like this would implode simply because the vibes were off or prank videos stopped landing. And they were onto something. Kristy and Desmond are Jehovah's Witnesses, a detail that adds an entirely different layer to the story. Within that faith, infidelity is essentially the only acceptable reason for divorce, and the only path that allows remarriage later. Beyond doctrine, there's immense pressure to preserve the family unit, especially when a couple has been together for most of their lives. Reportedly, they had broken up a few times before marriage, and both had hinted in the past that their relationship hadn't always been smooth, despite the years spent together. When you strip away the online outrage, the speculation, and the viral shock, what's left is something deeply human. When 2 people grow up together from their early teens, they don't just share memories, they shape each other. They witness every version of one another, awkward beginnings, evolving dreams, shifts in faith, identity, ambition, and self-understanding. That kind of bond can feel sacred. But it can also become quietly restrictive. When your entire sense of self has developed inside one relationship, change can feel terrifying and impossible to explain. Sometimes, falling apart doesn't come with explosive fights or dramatic betrayals. It comes quietly. Through emotional distance. Through conversations that feel scripted. Through laughter that sounds right but doesn't feel right. You can love someone and still feel trapped in a life that no longer fits who you're becoming. And when faith and community expectations are tightly woven into marriage, leaving isn't just about personal unhappiness, it can feel like a moral transgression unless very specific conditions are met. That's where the allegations take on a darker, more uncomfortable meaning. If Desmond's actions weren't driven by desire or romance, but by the belief that there was no other acceptable way out, then infidelity becomes less about indulgence and more about escape. That doesn't excuse the betrayal, but it reframes it. It suggests a person backed into a corner, choosing destruction because dismantling the marriage any other way felt impossible. What makes it even more painful is that Kristy seemingly didn't know he was already gone emotionally. To her, they were dealing with normal struggles, the kind people believe can be worked through with patience and effort. She didn't realize that Desmond had reached a point where staying felt unbearable. That imbalance is devastating. It means one person is still trying to save something the other has already mourned. So when he admitted to cheating, it wasn't just a confession, it was the moment she learned the marriage had already ended in his mind. And then there's the fact that he told her himself. That detail doesn't soften the hurt, but it does reveal intent. If his goal had been secrecy, he could have hidden it. People do it every day. Instead, he chose the one action guaranteed to bring everything crashing down immediately. That choice doesn't read as recklessness, it reads as desperation. As someone who wanted the truth exposed, no matter how much damage it caused or how badly it reflected on him. From Kristy's side, the damage would have landed like an earthquake. Cheating isn't only about someone crossing a physical boundary, it detonates the story you thought you were living. Suddenly, shared memories feel unstable. Moments that once felt safe and intimate get replayed with suspicion. Discovering that your partner didn't just betray you, but used that betrayal as a way out of the marriage, hits differently. It suggests that honesty was abandoned when it mattered most. So when Kristy moved forward with divorce, it wasn't simply paperwork, it was a line drawn for her own emotional survival. A clear message that, regardless of explanations or context, this was a boundary she could not cross back over. The public, however, tends to flatten situations like this into something easier to digest. People want neat categories, hero and villain, right and wrong, innocent and guilty. But real life resists that simplicity. It's possible for Desmond to have been deeply unhappy, overwhelmed, and desperate for an exit, and for his choices to still have caused profound harm. Understanding why someone does something doesn't mean excusing it. It just means recognizing that human beings often act destructively when they feel cornered by circumstances they don't know how to escape. That complexity shows up in Desmond's statement. There's no deflection, no attempt to hide behind religion, pressure, or incompatibility. Instead, the focus stays on accountability, especially where his children are concerned. When he emphasizes that Kristy is the mother of his children and that this bond will always matter, he's separating the collapse of the marriage from the permanence of parenthood. He may have stepped away from being a husband, but he's signaling that he doesn't intend to abandon his role as a father. For many observers, that distinction carries weight. There's also meaning in his acknowledgement that they faced difficulties and genuinely tried to work through them. That implies this wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow wearing down. Difficult conversations, attempts at repair, counseling perhaps, efforts made far from the camera's lens. Still, despite those attempts, he arrived at a point where leaving felt unavoidable to him. The real tragedy is that this realization didn't happen in sync. When one person emotionally exits long before the other, the collapse becomes far more painful and chaotic. His admission, "I made choices that I am not proud of," lands quietly but heavily. It doesn't dramatize the situation, and it doesn't minimize it either. It's an acknowledgement of acting against one's own values, of weakness rather than malice. For someone whose identity and public image may be closely tied to faith and moral uprightness, that kind of admission can feel like punishment in itself. Add public scrutiny to the mix, and the shame multiplies, turning a private breakdown into a very public reckoning. What often gets overlooked in stories like this is how relationships that begin in childhood can lock people into expectations they never consciously chose as adults. When you commit to someone at 14, you're doing so with an unfinished sense of self, with dreams that haven't yet collided with reality. The people you become decades later may still honor that bond, but they may also feel constrained by it. Growth doesn't always happen at the same pace or in the same direction. And sometimes, affection alone isn't enough to close the distance that forms. Faith adds another layer of tension. When divorce is framed as a moral failing instead of a relational outcome, people can feel forced to choose between personal truth and spiritual obedience. That pressure can push individuals toward extreme, self-destructive decisions. If leaving correctly feels forbidden, then leaving incorrectly can start to feel like the only door left open. It doesn't make the choice right, but it does make it tragically understandable. For Kristy, moving forward likely means healing on multiple levels. Not just from betrayal, but from the realization that the person she shared her life with was living a completely different internal story. That kind of discovery can shake your sense of reality. Trust doesn't just shatter outward, it cracks inward too. You begin questioning your instincts, your awareness, whether you ignored signs or never truly had access to them at all. Rebuilding after something like that requires time, support, patience, and an enormous amount of grace toward oneself. For Desmond, the fallout doesn't stop at signing divorce papers. Knowing that his choices caused real pain, to someone he once loved deeply, to his children, to the family structure they built, doesn't simply fade with separation. Even when leaving brings a sense of relief, it often walks hand in hand with grief. Letting go of a shared past, a shared identity, and a future once imagined together can weigh heavily, especially when the ending is both complicated and public. At its core, this story isn't really about scandal. It's about what can happen when emotions are buried for too long, when belief systems leave little room for honest self-exploration, and when relationships begin before people truly understand who they are or who they might become. It's about the cost of delaying hard conversations, of fearing judgment more than loss, and of choosing escape over confrontation. There are no winners here, only people trying to make sense of the damage left behind by decisions made under immense pressure. And that may be the most unsettling truth of all. Some of the most harmful choices aren't born from cruelty or selfish pleasure, but from desperation, confusion, and a desire for freedom that has nowhere safe to land. Desmond has said he took responsibility for what he did. According to him, he didn't hide behind rumors or allow the truth to trickle out through intermediaries or carefully crafted public statements. He told Kristy directly, face to face, in a space where there was no audience and no escape from the consequences. What followed were long, heavy conversations, marked not by theatrics, but by silence, disbelief, anger, and grief. Eventually, they reached the same conclusion: the marriage was broken in a way that couldn't be repaired. The decision to divorce wasn't explosive or dramatic. It was quiet, final, and deeply painful. He asked for privacy and compassion during that time, emphasizing that the end of a marriage isn't content for public consumption. For the people living it, it's not gossip, it's loss. It's mourning the collapse of a future that once felt certain. But once a public relationship shows a fracture, speculation rushes in. Almost immediately, stories began circulating, some framed as insider knowledge, others as moral judgment. One of the most persistent rumors claimed that Desmond had been attracted to men all along, and that his relationship with Kristy wasn't just young love or loyalty, but also a form of protection. According to this narrative, growing up within the Jehovah's Witness community meant that anything outside heterosexual norms wasn't merely discouraged, it was spiritually condemned. Being anything other than straight wasn't seen as personal, it was seen as a serious moral and religious violation, one that could cost someone their family, their community, and their sense of belonging. In that context, staying with one woman from a young age could be viewed as safety, structure, cover, a way to move through life without confronting parts of oneself that felt too dangerous to acknowledge. For years, that framework held. Kristy and Desmond grew up together, their relationship becoming a core part of his identity and public image: stable, traditional, loyal, safe. Then came visibility. Then came money. And with those came a different kind of freedom. Financial independence can loosen fear. Success can create a sense of insulation from consequences. The story people began telling was that once those pressures eased, once he no longer felt as bound by dependence or community expectations, doors he'd kept closed began to open. Curiosity that may have been suppressed or denied for years finally had space. And according to the rumors, that curiosity led him outside the marriage, not with another woman, but with a man. To be clear, none of this has been confirmed. It exists in the realm of speculation, anonymous tips, and online theorizing. But rumors don't spread on truth alone, they spread on plausibility. And this one traveled fast because it fit neatly into familiar narratives about repression, faith, fame, and late self-discovery. It offered an explanation that felt more complex than a simple cheating story, reframing the betrayal as something tangled up in identity, fear, religion, and a self that may have been delayed for years. Whether true or not, the story resonated because it reflected something many people recognize: what happens when parts of who you are hidden for too long, and the cost of finally letting them surface is everything you built to keep them buried. No matter how the details shake out, one thing is no longer up for debate: there is no path back to reconciliation. That door has been firmly shut. And that level of finality is exactly what sent public speculation into overdrive. Because when someone states, clearly and legally, that reconciliation is impossible, it signals something deeper than a single mistake. Affairs happen, sadly, and many couples work through them, even under public scrutiny. So when the line is drawn that hard, people assume the damage wasn't just about cheating, it was about something that fundamentally broke trust beyond repair. If the rumors hold any weight, what Kristy experienced wasn't only betrayal, but shock. The kind that rattles your sense of reality. The kind that forces you to revisit years of shared memories and question what was genuine, what was performance, and what may have been quietly withheld. Being cheated on is devastating on its own. But being cheated on in a way that completely alters your understanding of who your partner is? That's a different level of rupture. It shifts the question from, why wasn't I enough, to, who were you this entire time? And once you reach that place, rebuilding becomes nearly impossible. What's being circulated is that Desmond's infidelity involved a man, framed by some as him exploring, now that financial stability and independence gave him room to do so. That framing has understandably unsettled a lot of people, because it treats exploration as casual, almost experimental, while the fallout landed squarely on Kristy. For her, this wasn't curiosity or self-discovery. It was her marriage, her trust, and her life being upended without warning or consent. There are also claims that Desmond believed he could keep things discreet. That if he was careful enough, quiet enough, it could be managed. Compartmentalized. Controlled. But secrets rarely stay buried, especially when other people and emotions are involved. And when the truth came out, Kristy didn't hesitate. There was no bargaining, no denial, no attempt to smooth things over for appearances. Her response was immediate and decisive. She didn't stall. She didn't protect the brand. She didn't perform unity for the sake of optics. She filed for divorce and made it clear she was done. And that clarity is a big reason the public reaction has been so intense. As shocking as the situation is, many people have expressed deep respect for her refusal to tolerate betrayal, regardless of how complicated the narrative might be. In a culture that often pressures women to be endlessly understanding, sometimes at the expense of their own dignity, Kristy's choice landed as powerful. She didn't position herself as an obstacle to someone else's self-discovery. She didn't stay quiet to preserve a story that was hurting her. She chose herself, knowing full well the internet would dissect her pain, speculate endlessly, and attach her name to rumors she never asked to be part of. That's the part that gets drowned out in all the noise. Behind every theory, every viral take, every debate about sexuality and religion, there is a woman who honored her marriage and was blindsided by its collapse. A woman who had to process betrayal while the world debated whether her husband's actions were understandable, excusable, or inevitable. A woman who, in some corners, was expected to offer grace before she was even allowed to feel anger. The internet loves nuance in theory but struggles with compassion in practice. Yes, conversations about repression, strict belief systems, and double lives matter. They're important. But none of them erase the reality that Kristy did not agree to be collateral damage in someone else's internal struggle. She didn't sign up to absorb